Good morning, everyone. Welcome into this SEC morning report here on Southeastern 14. I am Blayne Gilmer, and as we do on each and every Monday here on the morning report, we will be going over all the things that we learned about each SEC team here on going into week 6 now of the season. I cannot believe it. It is flying by, halfway through the regular season almost. Got one more game, and then we'll be to the halfway point for most of these teams here. And guys, we are learning so much about each program. And if you're learning about us for the first time, you need to make sure to hit up Caroline.Smith at Southeastern 14 if you want to partner with us, if you want to have your advertisements go with a program, a channel that is pumping out more SEC content than anybody, then hit her up. You'll see it scrolling across the bottom. And also, as always, the morning report brought to you by CHOMPS. You can get that description below on how you can get some healthy protein snacks that have lots of different flavors, combinations, all that kind of stuff. So check that out in the description below. But guys, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk a little bit here about the week that was and what we learned from each one of these teams. We'll start, as we always do, in alphabetical order. We'll go with Alabama first, but then we'll skip to the team that they're going to be playing this upcoming week. It just kind of goes with the graphic here. So that's what we'll do, and we'll start with the Alabama Crimson Tide. So what we learned about Alabama has embraced the Milroe effect. Okay, they've embraced what this offense is going to look like under Jalen Milroe. He holds the ball way too long sometimes. He takes sacks that he should never take. He is trying to process this thing. You can see, and it's one read, two reads. Sometimes he's holding on a little bit too long. But when he decides to pull the ball down and run, he's as gifted as anybody in the league. I mean, he's a tremendous athlete, and we saw that on display against Mississippi State. We saw an Alabama offensive line be physical and play in a physical manner. Now, Mississippi State wasn't necessarily a juggernaut of a defense that Alabama was going up against, but I think we saw Alabama gain a little bit of an identity. It is never easy. I don't care what venue you go to, what team you're playing against, anywhere in the SEC, you go out and play a road game, particularly a night game. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be an environment that is conducive to you looking great, looking 100%. Alabama has plenty of things that they can clean up. I know that there was a lot of frustration on the internet as that game was going on with some of the play calls and stuff like that at Tommy Rees, but I think they have embraced an identity of being, okay, we're gonna be a run first football team. Only 12 pass attempts on the day. Now I know they called more passes than that, but Jalen Milroe took off and ran on a lot of those called pass plays, and that's kind of what I was calling for a couple of weeks ago from Alabama. Hey, simplify this thing for Jalen Milroe, make it more like 2020 Notre Dame with Ian Book back then. If it's not there, 1, 2, take off, run, encourage him to do that, have some design quarterback runs, get things going get some movement going, get him out on the perimeter a little bit. And they're doing all those things. But when he decides to tuck it and run, it is going to be hard for other teams to keep up. But Spy or not, it's hard for them to keep up with him. Now, Texas A&M, a little bit better caliber athlete that Alabama will be facing this weekend. So we'll see how they decide him and how DJ Durkin and the Aggie defense decide to go about trying to corral Jalen Milroe. They are a 3.5-point favorite on the road against Texas A&M this weekend. So we'll talk about the Aggies here. What we learned about the Aggies is that there seems to be good balance within that offense now, and there also seems to be a good culture in place offensively, because losing a guy like Connor Wigman, losing your quarterback there with a broken foot, that could derail a lot of people's seasons. And you got to give Max Johnson a lot of credit, and you also have to give Jimbo Fisher and the culture of the Aggie program a lot of credit. A lot of people have maligned and made fun of that Aggie program, with some of the the recruiting tactics that they had, loading up a big NIL class a couple years ago, and then, a lot of those guys heading out for the portal. But Jimbo Fisher you have to have a healthy culture to get a guy like Max Johnson to stay in the program, one, when he didn't have to after last year, and two, to have everybody have the confidence that, hey, once the guy, Connor Wigman, goes down, Max is going to come in, he's going to do his thing, and he is going to play, with no hesitation, and everybody's going to just pick up the slack around him a little bit. But he played well in his own right, even without them having to pick up any slack. And also his legs are an added dimension to this Texas A&M offense. Now, he's not Jalen Milroe like he's going to face Saturday with his legs, but he's plenty capable of extending drives and hurting you on key situations with how he can tuck the football and run it. I think Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels, they're running the football well enough for Texas A&M, and they have receivers that are capable of taking over games at any different point. We've seen Noah Thomas do it earlier this year. We've seen Anai Smith make great plays. Evan Stewart, we know what kind of talent he is. Moose Muhammad has played well in this Alabama game before for Texas A&M. So we'll see. The Fishers Aggies, they always get up for Alabama, but I think what we've learned from Alabama is on the Alabama side is Alabama's going to play tremendous defense. They're going to play with great effort on that side of the ball, and now they're embracing the Jalen Milroe kind of era of offense here. Nick Saban getting back to that, at least for this year here over at Alabama. And then from Texas A&M, we've learned that, hey, that culture is just fine. It is better than you thought it was, because if you're able to lose a starting quarterback, have Max Johnson not only be there to be available to be the backup because you've been able to retain him on the roster. So that's a great thing, but also that everybody has the confidence and just goes right in. And Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino have been able to work together to kind of mold this offense into more of a balanced offense and something that, is really a great compliment to a defense that everybody knew the defense was going to be talented. Edgerrin Cooper, Walter Nolan, all those guys along that defensive front, Shamar Turner, everybody knew that it was going to be tremendously talented. They do have questions on the back end. Can Alabama expose those in ways that Arkansas was unable to this past week? It's going to be a great matchup, and we've already done previews and predictions, all that kind of stuff on there, so make sure to go over and check that out. We would love for you to do that here on the channel, of course, once this show is over with. Now, let's talk about Arkansas. Arkansas, what we learned is they're just not good enough up front this year. They can't get a push. They can't get the run game going, even with Rocket Sanders back, and they're banged up right now. We learned that, hey, Luke Haas is a much bigger weapon than we thought, coming in as a freshman, and not having him with that broken collarbone now, that hurts you in terms of mismatches he's able to provide. He was big in that LSU game, and he had a catch early there and then got hurt against Texas A&M. Arkansas has a great quarterback in KJ Jefferson. He's been tough as nails in his career there. Him and Sam Pittman, really, kind of two blue-collar guys that are really embody a lot of what Arkansas is and really fit that program well. However, people are starting to get frustrated with Sam Pittman. As an offensive line coach, they would expect that to be the one area that Arkansas never struggled in, and it has been the area that they have struggled in most this year, just struggled mightily. Arkansas's defense is playing hard. I just think they're on the field too long. They got to get off the field on third down, prevent other teams from extending drives on them. But otherwise, guys, I just think that you have to, really look at this Arkansas team and question, okay, what's the trajectory? What is needed to go forward? I don't think you can just get rid of Sam Pittman after this year. Particularly, you got to see how it finishes out. But I do think we learned with Arkansas, hey, you got to get some more playmakers on the outside, because if you're unable to run the football, you got to be able to get separation on the outside. And then also they're going to have to retool on the offensive line in this offseason because they are not able to protect KJ Jefferson the way they need to, and they're not able to run the football. So that's what we learned about Arkansas. The team they'll be facing this Saturday, Ole Miss, the Rebels. We learned that, hey, Quinshon Judkins is back. He is able to help this team produce in the run game, him, Ulysses Bentley, and they created a lot of frustration for that LSU defense, particularly on the front. The way that they were going about with the tempo and the run game, that's what happens with Ole Miss. When they're able to generate some run game, then the tempo comes, and then other defenses, opposing defenses, get out of sort. Jackson Dart is the real deal. We knew that going into the Alabama game. I think his targets were limited in that Alabama game, and also Ole Miss just mentally is not in a good space when they face Alabama. I don't know if it's too much on Lane Kiffin or what, going up against Saban and all that kind of stuff, but they played with a totally different attitude against LSU. Now, that LSU defense is awful, and we'll get to that when we talk about what we learned about them here in a minute. But Jackson Dart with Trey Harris, with Caden Prescorn, with Zachary Franklin, with those two backs, that's a dangerous offense for Lane Kiffin and company. And I think we learned that, hey, if you allow Ole Miss to run the football at all, that tempo is going to get you. And also Jackson Dart is going to be freed up to just slice and dice you with the passing game after that, because if you had to commit any extra hats to the box, they have the weapons to hurt you in the passing game there. I also think just the confidence that we see out of Jackson Dart. We see how comfortable he is in year 2 of this Lane Kiffin system, and I really think that Vaught-Hemingway Stadium and that Ole Miss home environment is as good as any out there. I think those people were absolutely going nuts during that game, and when it comes down to it, Ole Miss is in a great shape going forward in the SEC West with a lot of big games coming up. But that's what we learned about Arkansas and about Ole Miss in these games. Now, as for Auburn, we're not going to be talking about Auburn in detail this week in terms of a team they're playing because they have a bye week. But I think one thing we learned about Auburn is they are a lot better than people thought defensively. They played well against not only Texas A&M defensively a couple of weeks ago. They've played well against Georgia, Eugene Asante, Jalen Simpson. A lot of these guys making tremendous plays. But we also learned that the passing game is a extreme and real problem that Hugh Freeze has to address for the Auburn Tigers. And it is just one that is kind of mind-boggling because when you're an RPO-based system, it's supposed to make some easy reads for you and create just open spaces for receivers to vacate where a defender was and stuff like that. And Auburn's just not able to make those plays through the air right now. I don't know if it's an inability to get on the same page between the quarterback and receivers. Gary Danielson said on the broadcast they'd taken a lot of the option routes out, and you could see that when you went back and reviewed it. It was Auburn receivers running to a spot, but still weren't able to make plays and complement the run game, which they added in the quarterback run, and I thought that was a good element, and that gave Georgia some problems. But Auburn, we just learned that Auburn's got to get some weapons in there for Hugh Freeze to utilize. They don't have enough playmakers right now, but they play a really good brand of defense. They play physical, made enough stops to keep that game close all the way throughout. Georgia also missed a few things there in that game in terms of offensively, but Auburn, got to give them credit. They played hard there on the Plains. Okay, now we'll talk about Florida. Florida, we learned that Florida has problems along that defensive front. They got their manhood challenged against Kentucky, and the Gators did not respond in a good way. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just getting physically dominated. It was guys consistently going underneath blocks. I mean, Kentucky would pull around they would run a counter tray play, or they would run a gap scheme play. And anytime you have that, there's a backside guard or a backside tackle pulling around guys. that is looking to get the play side linebacker over there. And that play side linebacker continually ran underneath the block of that puller. And Ray Davis said, thank you very much, and just ran right through that gap. So that is a problem in terms of gap integrity and discipline for Florida. They didn't play particularly physical on that side of the ball, and Kentucky just absolutely owned them. Now, passing wise and offensive wise, Graham Mertz did okay. Did enough things to help Florida try to stay in this game early on, but the defense just continued to get it run down their throat. The problem for Florida is when they don't have a running game going, when Etienne and Johnson aren't able to really get it going. Only 69 yards rushing on the day for Florida against this Kentucky team, similar to the Utah game earlier this year where they had 31 yards rushing between the two of those guys. I think that when you're looking at this Florida team, they just don't have the playmakers on the outside, even though they've got talented guys right now, but they're freshmen like Andy Jean, Eugene Wilson. Of course, we know what Ricky Pearsall can do, but they're not dynamic enough to take over ball games and help Graham Mertz when the running game is not there. So we learned that if you're Florida, you got to get better on the offensive line and defensive line because both got owned. The linebackers were not very good at all. The second level was a big letdown for Florida's defense. So we learned that the Gators really, really need to revamp along the lines of scrimmage this offseason. And Billy Napier, I would venture to say things are starting to get a little warm down there in Gators country. And I'm not talking about the temperature either. I think that there's an expectation of how Florida is supposed to play. People are saying, hey, they're tired of the excuses. You look at some of these rosters around the country that have been flipped and turned over and the transfer portal used and things like that in a limited amount of time. And I know Billy Napier hasn't been there very long at all, but I'm just telling you, the patience is growing thin for Florida fans. And, if you look at the schedule, Florida has Vanderbilt, where it should be a get-right game, but at South Carolina is not going to be an easy environment. At Columbia, and then you get a bye week before Georgia. They really, really need to win these next two games, in my opinion, if you are Florida. And if you're Billy Napier, I think you really, really need to try to get these next two games before you play Georgia in Jacksonville. And we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. But I think we learned that Graham Mertz just serviceable, okay, but really that run game is what let them down, and the inability to stop the run versus Kentucky was really rough as well. Vanderbilt, we learned that Vanderbilt just doesn't have enough playmakers to really overcome any kind of adversity. Listen, Ken Sills started and he was serviceable, did some good things, but I mean, overall, they just don't have the talent along the line of scrimmage to be able to compete with most SEC ball clubs. I mean, they're not able to run the football at all. You look at this Vanderbilt team. They had 41 yards rushing, so they couldn't get any movement. They did somewhat hold down Missouri's run game, only 137 yards, which isn't a dominant performance by Missouri on the ground. But hey, they didn't have to be because they're slinging it for 400 yards, and Vanderbilt's giving up big plays there. They allowed Missouri to be 50% on third down. So, guys, once again, even though Ken Sills, started and did some things okay, he, did still turn over the football one time with the interception. But overall, 20 of 31, 259, 2 touchdowns. The problem with Vanderbilt is just they have a lack of talent compared to all these other SEC teams. I know Clark Lee's doing his best to change that. They're trying to embrace as many, unique NIL opportunities as they can find there in Nashville and try to do things like that. They're investing in the program in terms of building, the construction that's going on, the facilities there in Vanderbilt. But overall, right now, they just don't have the talent to compete. They don't have the means on the line of scrimmage when it comes to being able to physically hold up against people at the point of attack. So that's got to be a frustrating feeling for Vanderbilt. But those are those two teams and what we learned from them as we head into week 6 and what we saw out of them in week 5. Now, the next two teams, alphabetical order-wise, are Georgia and Kentucky, and those two happen to play each other this weekend. What we learned from Georgia is that, hey, there's some undisciplined guys in that defense. The eye discipline failed them a couple times, which is not a calling card of a Kirby Smart defense. But you have to also say that, hey, when it came down to it, they made plays when they needed to, got enough stops. But overall, it's that lack of contain, I think, that has to worry you. They're solid up the middle. The interior defensive line, I thought that the inside linebackers played well when people tried to attack up the middle. But when it's on the edges there, they, for some reason, by alignment, have guys that seem to be, beat by alignment. They didn't leverage the ball tremendously well. And then also when it comes to the forced defenders on the other side, I think that's a problem for them as well. They're not able to fill the alley fast enough at times, or they, when they do, they miss tackles on the perimeter when they're unblocked. Tyke Smith, as well as he's played, has had a couple missed tackles out there for Georgia. So got to clean things up, when it comes to discipline wise there on that Georgia defense. But I will say, I think Georgia, we learned a ton about Carson Beck. He was 16 of 20 in the second half, over 200 yards passing, just absolutely played tremendously in that second half for Georgia. Didn't play awful in the first half, just missed Oscar Delp early on. The interception that he threw, it was what it was. The guy came through the back of Marcus Roseman, Jack Saint, and, that is what it is. He made a great play on the football. But overall, you get the ball to Brock Bowers and your Carson Beck, you're going to be just fine. But Carson Beck made throw after throw on third down situations that were really big. The offensive line pass protects really well. They've still got to find ways to get the run game going, whether that's true handing the ball off to a running back, either Dajon Edwards or Cash Jones. Kendall Milton can't seem to get healthy and stay on the field, so don't know what's going on there. But whoever they hand the ball off to, whether that's getting some run game going there or the extension of the run game, as Kirby likes to call it, with quick screens and fly sweeps and things like that, maybe get Dominic Lovett more involved in that kind of stuff. But I think the big move that Georgia needs to make is Dylan Bell needs to be a full-time running back. That guy is electric when he touches the ball in the backfield. He's not just a change of pace guy. He's 6'2", 210 pounds. He can run the football, has great running back type instincts back there when he has the ball in his hands. He's big enough to pick up blitzes and stuff like that. So I just think he needs to be a full-time back and let things run back there with him at running back. That would be a big deal for Georgia. But that's what we learned about Georgia. They have a quarterback that is capable of playing really good football, is not daunted by adversity, is able to handle pressure situations, and played really well on the road in the second half. Georgia's probably has 2 losses on the year if it's not for Carson Beck, in my opinion. They don't come back and win that South Carolina game, at home in the rain without him playing really well in that second half. And then Auburn, he's played really well in the second half as well. So here's the thing, Georgia, not the dominant team that we've seen the last couple of years, but when you have quarterback play like that, and also the defense is good enough as they have been throughout the year, then you got a shot. You got to be able to run the football a little bit better if you're Georgia. Kentucky, running the football, not an issue. Ray Davis is a grown man. And also, it wasn't just him running, through people and things like that. He was also patient and setting up runs. I thought he really helped the Kentucky offensive line with his patience and allowing them to get around when they were on gap scheme, pulling around for him and he froze defenders a couple of times and allowed them to even execute their blocks a little bit better. So I thought that Ray Davis was absolutely huge for this team, not only to his patience, but then once the hole was there, he showed great speed to be able to make huge plays for Kentucky. 280 yards rushing against a Florida defense that I think, coming into it, weren't the greatest in the world, but they made them look undisciplined. They confused them with some of the stuff they were doing in their gap scheme game, and Florida consistently was running underneath the blocks. So you got to give credit to Liam Cohen and what they were able to design in that run game to frustrate that Florida defense and just keep them on their heels the entire game. We learned also too that Devin Leary is not the same Devin Leary that he was before injury. I don't know if he has just lost all of his confidence or what, but he is not able to put the ball on people when he needs to, and in wide open times down there by the goal line. Early on in the series, Dan Key sits down on a sit route, or he had Ray Davis in the end zone, missed both of them. And it just seems to be a lack of confidence right now. Then when he does get his feet right and sets it and rips it in there to somebody, it seems to be that they drop the football. The receivers are not on the same page with the quarterback. I think there's just a lack of consistency, lack of continuity there in that passing game, and they're going to have a little bit better production through the air if they're going to go into Athens, Georgia this weekend and try to pull an upset against the number one team. Ray Davis is going to get some yards, but you're not just going to come down there and run right down the throat of Georgia, especially when Georgia knows that, hey, that's your number one weapon. So it's going to take Liam Cohen and Devin Leary getting a little bit better with what's going on in that passing game, trying to get those receivers involved early, things like that, to give Florida a little bit more balance. Now, defensively, we know Kentucky plays extremely hard, and we learned that Deion Walker is an absolute stud. He rocked Florida's world early on when they dropped him out. All big 300 and probably 30 pounds of him drops out in zone coverage and a little over the ball route for Florida, and he just absolutely wrecked that dude's world, knocked the ball up in the air, interception for Kentucky, and they capitalized off of it, and then the route was kind of on from there. Of course, so we said, Deion Walker, he's a force not only in the middle athletically, but then you have J.J. Weaver, who seems like he's been there forever. He made some nice plays off the edge, was able to get some pressure on Graham Mertz, and Trevin Wallace, I thought, was playing tremendous. They've got two great corners right now that are playing good football, and Andrew Phillips and Maxwell Hairston. So I think this Kentucky defense is salty. It's going to be the best that Georgia will have faced all year. So excited for that game. We got a full preview of that over on the channel as well. But those are the two teams that were next in line in our series of What Did We Learn? Next, LSU. We learned that LSU is a football team that is kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, okay? On one side, they have an offense that is unbelievable. I mean, really remarkable how explosive this LSU offense is. Lane Kiffin even comparing it to the 2020 Alabama team that was so good offensively that during the COVID year that just absolutely destroyed people. Brian Thomas has turned into a bona fide star there across from Malik Neighbors, who was already a star coming into the year. They've got other weapons like Mason Taylor and Kyron Lacey and that Jaden Daniels can find. They've got a good running back in Logan Diggs, but they're atrocious on defense. I mean, they're absolutely awful on defense, and they don't have any answers. I mean, they've tried rotating different cornerbacks in there. They've tried changing out their starting rotation with the inside linebackers. They were misfitting runs against Ole Miss. Couldn't handle how things were going over there in Oxford this weekend, and to the tune of 55 points and 706 yards. That is the worst defensive performance in LSU history ever. That's the most yards that they've given up. I just think that the Tigers are way too talented. They did way too well in the portal, because it's not like Omar Spates, who misfit a couple of runs. It's not like he's some scrub. He over there played all Pac-12 caliber ball for Oregon State. Did some great things. Now he's coming over here and has struggled a little bit. Greg Penn not playing, tremendously well. Whit Weeks was playing great for the couple of weeks leading into this, and then he doesn't see much time in this game. So who knows what happens there, but definitely in the secondary is a liability for them. And that's going to be a problem for them when they're facing Missouri. We've already talked about Ole Miss. We can go on to Missouri here. They've got a really talented quarterback, a quarterback that is much more than a game manager, as people like to label him, with Brady Cook. We learned that Missouri has just an explosive offense. He's really played well the last few weeks and been able to shoulder the burden when he needs to. And speaking of burden, he's got Luther Burden that he can throw the ball out to and is a tremendous weapon. I think that's going to be a nightmare of a matchup for LSU with what's going on with them defensively, and on the back end of that defense is now they have to go into Columbia, Missouri, and take on a red hot Missouri team, 5-0 on the year. Brady Cook playing extremely well. They're getting just enough running back production. I know Cody Schrader came in leading the SEC in rushing, but it's not like he has just these breakout performances. He's just being consistent, and they're able to stay efficient in the run game, which is all you need in college football today. You don't have to be some dominant running team. You just have to be able to run the football when you need to run the football, and Missouri has been able to do that quite well. I think, Brady Cook, always there's a threat of his legs as well, athletic guys. So they need to get healthy on the defense side of the ball. They had some guys banged up, some injuries coming into the Vanderbilt game. I think some of those guys rested. We'll get a full report on that on Tuesday here on the morning report, as we always go through injuries and news and notes from the previous week and how those are going to set up into the following week. But I think really when you look at this Missouri team, it's the battle of the Tigers here. I'm just wondering, okay, the over-under 63 here, that may be a little bit too low with how LSU is playing on defense, and with Luther Burden being on the other side. I could see this being an early kick. This is 11 Central kick, 12 Eastern. What's the culture like of LSU? What's the motivation? So we'll see what we learned. We know what we learned about both of these teams. We learned that LSU has problems on the defensive side, and it's at multiple levels. We learned that Missouri is playing a solid brand of football on both sides of the football, and I'm excited to see the matchup in between them. As always, like I said, previews, predictions, all that kind of stuff already going to be up on the channel as we go here in the next day or so, as those have been recorded, and will start to be pumped out here before too long. Mississippi State, I think what we learned about Mississippi State in that Alabama game is they have some fight to them. They're gonna grind. Will Rogers is a competitor, but they just didn't have the weapons to beat top tier teams. They're overmatched athletically when they face. And listen, we thought that LSU was a top tier team when the way that LSU came in a couple weeks ago and really laid it to Mississippi State in terms of they were impressive defensively in that game. But I think it goes more to show the woes that Mississippi State has on that side of the ball as well. They weren't able to generate any kind of passing game, and that's been a problem for them this year with every game except the South Carolina game, of course. Ran the ball decently well. Woody Marks had 9 carries for 68 yards, so 7.6 yards a carry. Not terrible, but they weren't able to do it consistently against Alabama. I think that when you talk about Will Rogers, he's just struggled to transition to this new offensive style. Him and Kevin Barbay kind of learning what each other like to do and how to do it, and they don't have Tulu Griffin is a dynamic player, but in terms of true receiving threats that are able to separate on a consistent basis and be great route runners and things like that, I don't think Mississippi State is in the position they need to be with pro-style receivers right now. So we'll see how that progresses going forward. But, I think defensively they play hard with Jet Johnson and with Nate Watson there. But overall, they don't have the Jimmies and Joes to stick with a guy like a Jalen Milroe. He was able to take over that game with his legs. They weren't able to contain him. And listen, they tried to play a really aggressive style of defense, and sometimes that comes back to burn you when you have an athletic quarterback like that over there. So Mississippi State still has work to do in Zach Arnett's first year here. They'll get a get-right game as they get Western Michigan coming to Starkville this week before they get a bye week and then go to Arkansas and to Auburn. Those are three games that Mississippi State should have a chance to compete in. To compete in a little bit better with what we've seen out of those teams. Arkansas and Auburn don't necessarily have juggernaut offenses, so we'll see how that goes for them going down the road here. South Carolina and Tennessee are both off this week after they played in their game against each other, and it was an emotional game for Tennessee after not only losing their season but losing Hendon Hooker and losing that game last year in Columbia in blowout fashion, 63-38 last year. So you knew the people in Knoxville this year were going to be hyped up, really excited for this one. It was a great atmosphere. I think we learned a little bit that, hey, just like Ole Miss, if Tennessee is able to get that run game going on you early, you're in trouble because that allows them to get that tempo going. It allows them to get in rhythm of what they like to do offensively. And Tennessee was able to rush it for 238 yards on the night. Big night out of Jalen Wright, who came back from a little bit of an injury against UTSA. So that was good to see him have a big night over there for the Volunteers and not be injured. But they had a three-headed monster with Wright, with Small, with Sampson. We knew going into the year that they were going to be able to do things in the run game with that trio of guys. I still think Joe Milton is not playing great. I mean, he makes some terrific throws at times, puts the ball in places where only his guy can get him, but then he's careless with it as well. And early on, threw an interception, and when South Carolina came down and scored a field goal, and then they were moving the ball early on, and then Joe Milton threw that pick in South Carolina again, I was like, oh boy, what's going to happen here? Because I said early on, hey, there's some people in that program just looking for an excuse to play Nico over there with all the money they have invested in him and NIL and all that kind of stuff. So I think that Tennessee is going to be a little bit hampered in that passing game going before you lose Brew McCoy to a knee injury. And just have to say that looked like a devastating knee injury. So thoughts and prayers to Brew McCoy. Hope for a fast recovery there. But they're going to be without one of their, veteran wide receiver targets going forward. Of course, Squirrel White, Ramel Keaton continue to make some big plays. Squirrel White specifically in this game. So I think they looked a lot better up front with having Cooper Mays back. That's a big deal over there. So Tennessee offensively, it's all predicated on can they run the football. They were able to run the football. If they're able to do that going forward, then you're going to see Tennessee have success. They get a chance to try to get as healthy as possible before they welcome a really, really good Texas A&M team in 2 weeks from now. So excited to see that out of Tennessee. South Carolina, Spencer Rattler just doesn't have any help. So we learned that, hey, that program needs to recruit better. They need to hit the portal hard. Shane Beamer, there's really not a whole lot of excuse for not having the roster, kind of turned over at this point. We've seen people do it faster. I think much like with Billy Napier, people are going to start losing some patience there in South Carolina. Josh Heupel's only in year 3 of his program as well, and you see a difference between how those two programs are operating and the kind of talent that they're bringing in at this point. Now, I do think this upcoming recruiting class for Shane Beamer is good, but can they get a little success between now and then? Because it's just going to leave a really, really bad taste in South Carolina's fans' mouth, especially if you don't win games like Florida and Missouri, even though Missouri's a really good-looking team now, like as we mentioned. So I think the Gators not this Saturday, but the next Saturday at home, that is a huge game, not only for the future of this South Carolina program, but the future of Shane Beamer as well, just in terms of confidence and where this program's going. But it is a murderous stretch these next 3 games. I mean, Florida, that you do get them at home, so that's good, and I think they're on par with them in terms of talent wise and things like that. But at Missouri, at Texas A&M, that's really tough. And then before you end up the season with a Kentucky game at home and a Clemson game at home, so there's still opportunities out there to get some decent wins for Shane Beamer and company, but it's going to be really tough. And we've already talked about Texas A&M, and then Vanderbilt as well, guys. So we've made our way through the alphabet there of the SEC teams. Guys, I'm so excited for week 6 of the season. We appreciate you guys tuning in as always. If you like this content, do us a couple favors. Hit that like button. That really helps our analytics. Go ahead and subscribe. It's absolutely free. If you do want to become a member, there is a membership button there where you can hit, and it just helps us create content, keep going and doing all these videos for you guys. And again, if you want to partner with us, Caroline.Smith at Southeastern 14 is who you can reach out to advertise with the program. Thank you to CHOMPS. You can get a 15% discount code in the description. So check that out. Great healthy protein snacks. They've got beef, they've got turkey, they got venison, everything you could want over there in terms of flavor wise as well. So it is the place to get some good snacks, not only for game day, but just going around doing things. You're on the run, don't have time to get something, get you a CHOMPS right there, because it is nutritious and it is filling and it's really, really good. And guys, we appreciate you tuning in to this SEC morning report here on Southeastern 14. I come to you each and every morning, Monday through Thursday, with the morning report. And then on Fridays during football season, we have Jake's Takes with Jake Crane of Crane & Company. So guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Southeastern 14, and we will catch you tomorrow morning on another episode of the Morning Report. We'll go around the league looking at injuries and looking at some key news and notes going into these matchups, some matchup trends and things like that for week 6. So for everybody at Southeastern 14, I am Blayne Gilmer, and we will see you tomorrow morning on the Tuesday edition of the SEC Morning Report right here on Southeastern 14.